grade 10 biology on the characteristics of living things. Characteristics of living things. So we are looking at biology, specifically the characteristics of living things. Now, we know that things can be categorized into two. There are things that we call non-living things, and there are things also that we call living things. So on top here, you may have things in general. Then under things in general, we have non, and then we have living. Okay? Non-living, and we have living things. Where under the non-living things, we can classify them into two. The first one is animals. Okay? Animals, which are classified as living things. The second one is plants. Okay? But the question is, why is it that these two are classified as living things? Living plants and living animals. Why are they classified as living things? So there is a reason as to why things should be classified as either living or non-living things. Okay? So, what do you think are the qualifications of a living thing? So living things usually have qualifications. For them to be called living or for them to be called non-living, there should be certain characteristics that they should possess in order for them to be what? To be classified as living things or non-living things. So let us just look at when can we say this thing is living and this thing is non-living. Okay? So we can do that by looking at the characteristics that a non-living thing possesses and the characteristics that a living thing possesses in order for it to be called a living thing. Number one, under the characteristics of living things. Okay? The first one is living things move. Okay? The first thing is that living things do what? They do move. So when we say living things move, we are basically talking about a permanent change in the position of an organism. So I know you might be thinking, no, stones, they move, or maybe, yeah, sometimes you leave a paper in an open environment, it moves from one position to the other. That's not the movement that we're talking about. So the actual movement that we're talking about is one that is not affected by the external forces. It occurs from within an organism. Okay? So, for example, in plants, I believe you learned in integrated science, that was in grade 9, where I hope you are familiar with the terms eutrophism, hydrotropism, as well as phototropism. So basically those are the movements that plants usually carry out. Okay? As you can see, I can also move my hands. I can move from this position to the other, this position to the other. That simply means I am a living organism. Okay? So now, under the characteristics of living things, the first thing we said, living organisms move. In other words, they usually undergo a permanent change in their position compared to the initial position. Second characteristic of living things is that they reproduce. So you expect living things to reproduce. The process by which matured organisms are able to form younger ones or offsprings, okay? Which in this case can either be identical or cannot be what? Identical. But the thing is, if something is classified as living, then that simply means that living thing should be able to reproduce at the right time. Okay? Number 3 characteristic is that living things also do what? They grow. Okay? Yes. So living things are expected to grow. When something is not growing, then that simply means it's lacking what? One of the characteristic or one of the requirement for life. So living things are expected to do what? To grow. The fourth one is that living things, other than growing, other than reproducing, other than moving, living things are also what? Sensitive. Sensitive. In other words, what we are trying to say here is that living things should be able to respond to situations they find themselves in. Okay? Yeah, just like plants respond to light by growing towards it under the process phototropism. Okay, equally human beings respond to situations they find themselves or the changes in the environment. So you can see that for something to be called living, then it should be able to respond. They are sensitive. A stone cannot respond no matter how much you hit it. But if you hit a living thing, of course you expect an animal to respond to that change in the environment. Okay, movement, reproduction, growth, and sensitivity. Last but not the least in this discussion, living things should be able to do what? To feed. Okay? We know that plants are the only organisms that are able to manufacture their own food. Okay? Why do they manufacture their own food? They manufacture their own food in order for them to feed the same food that they manufacture, so as they can carry out processes of life like movement, like reproduction, like growth. Okay? These processes of life require energy. Okay? Even just feeding itself requires what? Energy. So basically these are the characteristics of living things. So if an organism has these characteristics here, then we are saying it is what? It is living. So you are asked a question to say, when is something said to be living, or when is it